This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Welcome to the Outpost Security RBA podcast. I am your host, Will Robus, and not with me today in this intro is Stuart McIntosh. This episode is a continuation of episode 15, our discussion of the Switch framework as it relates to cybersecurity. So we decided the discussion went on a little deeper and longer than one episode could hold. So we decided to split it into two. And today will be the part 2 and conclusion of the discussion we started in episode 15. As always, we'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. Give a call out to the RBA community with a web presence at rba.community. We're recording this episode in December. As of now, all of the essentially monthly meetups, virtual meetups, have been posted on the rba.community site with one handy registration page. You can sign up for some or all of them and get them at least earmarked on your calendars for 2024. In addition to the RBA.community website, we have a Slack channel, continue to add new members every week. It is your kind of 24/7 sounding board and helpline for anything related to RBA, as well as more general defensive security, threat detection, alerting, and response. And you can sign up for that Slack community. There's a link on the RBA.community site, as well as the Outpost Security website. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a continuation of episode 15, where we talked about one of our go-to frameworks for executing change, especially complex change that involves different groups and different people. So the book we're referencing is called Switch, written by Dan and Chip Heath. In the book, it centralizes around a metaphor with the elephant and a rider. And we talked about this metaphor a little bit, but it really is kind of the pervasive metaphor that defines this framework. And so I will do a quick kind of recap of what we talked about in the last episode. Of course, feel free to go back and listen to it and listen to these in a series. And as well as check out outpost-security.com. We've got a page on the website that has some pretty detailed show notes across all of our episodes, but especially these two episodes. And probably most critical is a link to kind of the one pager of the framework that's essentially accompanies the Switch book, available on the Heath Brothers website. So last time we talked about kind of the first two elements of this framework, and the first one is directing the rider. Second one is motivating the elephant. And the third piece, which we'll get to in detail later in this episode, is called Shape the Path. And just as a little quick refresher, direct to rider has kind of three actions in it. The first one being follow the bright spots, and we attach this to the risk-based alerting framework in general. The second piece of directing the rider is scripting the critical moves, and we broke this down again in the RBA example, highlighting that number one, start where you are. So don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to put a whole bunch of dependencies that makes your change sort of conditional. And then the second part of that is simplify the critical moves, simplify that critical path, and focus on what's accessible. And if it's not accessible, break it down into elements that are more accessible. So follow the bright spots, look at what's been working or what has worked either inside of your organization or in others. Script those critical moves, really dial in that critical path. And then the third piece of directing the rider is pointing to the destination, connecting the bright spots to desired outcomes for your team. And we talked a little bit about how when you put all these three things together, again, this is kind of the rider is a metaphor for the rational, practical parts in all of us. But when you put all this together, the directing the rider piece is really about the scoping and planning. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, the better you can craft this, the better you can stack the deck for success, the more likely you are to have positive outcomes. The second piece of the framework is motivate the elephant. And the three actions in this part of the framework, again, the elephant's the emotional inertia side, where the rider is kind of the practical, rational side. So to motivate the elephant, there are three kind of key pieces to that. Find the feeling. And we use an example of when you show your team, when you show your org, RBA in action, when they can see it come alive, it really sparks aha moments, as well as some motivation of, oh, this is possible, and this actually will make my life better and make us better at what we're trying to do as a security team. And related to that, finding the feeling, is the second piece, was just shrink to change. And that simply is get to that tangible milestone that people can see and feel as quickly and with the most efficient amount of effort as possible. And this folds back into kind of that scoping and planning piece of directing the rider. The third piece of motivate the elephant is grow your people. And this we talked about being sort of the formalization and scalability or scaling of the change that you're creating. So turning these milestone wins and the progress towards your goal into an operating system, creating habits, really building it into sort of the muscle memory of what you're trying to accomplish as a team and an organization. And the closing point on that piece last week, which is still, I think, one of my favorites, is when you do this successfully, the ability to execute becomes infectious. And that is where we left off the last episode. And this is where we'll pick up the discussion, going right into the third element of the Switch framework, and that is shaping the path.
So we have these three steps for figuring out how to wrangle in the rider and get them to move. We have these three steps to wrangle in the elephant and get them to move. We think we know how to get them on the same page. How do we make it easier for them to function together? Because it's almost like, I feel like it's planetary alignment to get these two on the same page, right? Like it's a magical feat to do one or the other, but to do them both and have to hold them together for more than a day, how do we, are there ways of doing that to help?
Yeah. So the third part of the framework is shape the path. And for me, this is really, really where you stack the deck, right? You create, the more you can shape the environment to focus and funnel in the direction that the change needs to go to be successful, the easier it is for you, right? It's like paving the road. Actually, I used to use that metaphor all the time, especially in executing projects. Is hey, the smoother and the further I can pave the road ahead, the easier it is for the people to traverse
all
it
along.
Yeah. So in that.
So what are the elements of this shaping of the path?
So the elements are, number one is tweak the environment. So that's essentially what I just said. Like, how do we mold our reality and the constraints of it? Constraints are huge here, right? So like, what do we have from a systems perspective, from an environment, from an operational perspective? I mean, this goes into org charts as well, right? So how do we, because we're not going to like start with a clean slate, right? You can't just say, hey, we're going to start over and do it this way. That just isn't usually possible. So the less disruptive you can be, the more successful you're going to be, because you want to have.
That That sounds like shrinking the change.
Exactly, shrinking the change. So, from a practical standpoint in cybersecurity, we've seen, and this essentially is what we talked about last week, is, hey, we've had most customers, if not all customers, have a really strong set of tools and data and infrastructure. And they also have a strong team. Even the small teams have some good talent. And more importantly, they have people that understand the environment, right? Understand their companies and organizations. So if we can kind of just tune those things together from a technology standpoint and a data standpoint, and really level up without putting a bunch of new things in or saying, hey, you have to go buy this stuff or implement this stuff, that gets them to automatically focus on what's kind of in front of them at the moment. They're not waiting for some wish list. And then I think the next two parts of shaping the path is, again, just kind of a scaling and an execution of some of the previous points. And that is build habits. And we talked about that from a growing your people and a training standpoint, right? So how do we create this? So we implement the change in the process, and it's repeatable and scalable. Obviously there's variances and there's exceptions, but 80-20 rule here, like make sure that 80% is repeatable at least.
And how many times have we walked into SOCs where each analyst comes up with their own investigative and remediation process? Well, that's not building habits. It's an individual habit, but that might not coincide with the habits we want as a program, our final destination. It's not helping, but we don't know. So this is where that build habits, at least document what you're doing now, and then take it from there. Start cycling through it as a team. And then you can figure out, okay, how do we adjust it? But no one wants to admit that their security program is probably based more on the habits of the team than the dollar amount they spend. No one wants to admit this. But I think that is why you see large organizations get rocked and small ones not, and vice versa. So what's the indicator if it's not financial spend? I think it's the habits of the people involved. That's where here, how do we not see this with health all the time? It has nothing to do with how expensive your workout equipment is or how much you spend on food. Doesn't matter. That's not an indication of outcome. What's a better indicator, leading indicator, is your consistent habits.
Well, and that kind of folds back into, two of the key pieces, and that is your technology and your process needs to support the sharing of good habits and the coaching of bad, right?
Guardrails around bad.
Yep. So
and gas for good. Like, just dump all the fuel you want on them if it's a good habit.
Yep. And that goes back to kind of designing the process in and of itself, and getting the technology to work to support it that way, right? So
I think process is the guardrails of what kind of habits we intentionally want to do. A process is simply a documented habit that you want everyone to participate in. It doesn't, what you're trying to do is get them in that routine. And then from there, and honestly, this consistency is what actually nets good security programs more value. And it's why you can put them anywhere. So some of my old coworkers have been dropped into consulting roles or internal roles, or like they've been put all over. And they continue to be successful and valuable in each program and each role. Why? It's because they've taken habits with them. And so this third bullet point, rally the herd. So if I pick up someone who's done this and been exposed to this and does it well, you and I have seen when some people leave an environment that has our 0 to 1 and they go to a new environment, what's the first thing they say? Oh man, I need that app in here. Well, why? It's because their habits are associated to that app, because to them, that's the mechanism for being successful. And so when they look around, they see this chaos and this rally the herd call. Sometimes they come off as the deranged new hire because they keep saying Outpost or they keep saying RBA, and it's like, yeah, I don't know what's wrong with them. They drink the weird water. But that's because it hasn't, the other people haven't had that experience, that moment, that light bulb. Because if they did, rallying the herd now is essentially we have habits as a group, and we have an environment that supports these habits. So now as new people come in or as we expand, because remember, we talked about this saying, start with a single project for this process. Pick something that's stuck. Pick something you've struggled with, something. Rally the herd is, how can we expose more to this? How this sunlight of this process, how do we remove other obstacles and let them participate in this as well? It could be additional teams like this. The rally the herd always comes to mind when we started doing insider threat detection, because we needed to now engage executive protection, HR, legal, compliance, right? People who have not been exposed to our world, but we have to get them on board. We have to get them to feel, to shrink the change, to grow their own people. Like, we had to do all these steps with them. And so to me, rally the herd is almost how to advocate with others who haven't been involved to bring them in. So
yeah,
and I know we've jumped between a bunch of these kind of bullets, but really, and we'll put these up on the show notes, but it's easy to jump between these because there's so many examples in your mind of where this could be helpful. And that's what we mean by it, kind of a hack, which is it's a different lens to now look at efforts and your workload and maybe why you don't want to go to work today, right? If you're dragging your feet, maybe that's the elephant. Or maybe that's the rider because you don't know what your critical moves are. So you don't see the necessity in doing all this effort. Don't know.
Yeah, no, and it's, I mean, walking through this in a discussion, I mean, it starts with this. I mean, vision is part of it, but it's more about where can we get to, where are we going now, and how do we get there from a process standpoint, from a team standpoint. I mean,
you and I have walked into programs where literally their destination was their ability to work every alert that fires. That was it. That their big goal as a security program was to process all low through critical alerts. Well, and where were they when we walked in? Critical and high. And so what did their critical moves look like? I got to get faster because I now need to go into mediums. Okay, now I need to go into lows. Like it, they had a goal, but it didn't take advantage of any of this stuff we've talked about.
Well, it was just didn't have a critical path. I mean, it's kind of.
And you ask them why they wanted to do that. It was because they think something's hiding in there that's bad. Find the bad. That they were still there. Like, how do I find the bad? So I personally am a fan of this framework. I like it a lot. I think it's small enough that it's easy to remember. It's not like some of these approaches and books, and so there's like spreadsheets and exercises, and this is more just intention. Are you intentionally addressing some of these? So I like this quite a bit for all kinds of things that maybe might be difficult or involve multiple personalities or complicated.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're dealing with, I mean, for lack of a better term, innovation, but also just uncharted territory. Hey, I've never done this before. We've never really figured this out. We have some ideas, but I don't know if they'll work or what order or things like that. When you have kind of, you need to get better or build a new reality, but you're a little unsure about how or what to do. And for me, this framework helps me see that in totality. So I can hypothesize and experiment. I can walk through the different pieces and visualize the people involved and the inertia and the org. And, I know what battles I'm going to have to fight no matter what. And it helps me kind of move those pieces on a proverbial board to come up with a full plan, right? I mean, it might not be a detailed plan, but it says, hey, I think I can do this. I think it's going to create this kind of feeling. I think we can distribute this and scale it relatively quickly and relatively successfully. And then I think this would operate as a durable sort of system across my org or team or whatever I'm trying to affect, right? So I can have these sort of planning thought experiments to come up with a straw man of, all right, this is the thing I want to try to execute right now, knowing that if I learn things along the way, I can go back and kind of tweak whatever I need to tweak. So,
and what I was going to say, so I've seen, so every effort we've done, I'm going to say was successful there. But we deal with different personalities, different size companies, different pressures that they're under as an organization, as a team. And so what I think about is I've had run-ins with people where it was just a clash. It just was. And what it was, so when I step back to look at, okay, I need to make this successful. Why? I have a destination that we as a group need to get to. And that includes them. They're coming with, whether they like it or not, they're coming with. And what I kept doing was saying, this is logically why we have to do that. I kept speaking to the writer because I thought that's who was in control for this person. Come to find out, the writer was never in control for this person. It was the elephant. And no one asked them, how do you feel about the fact that what's being asked of you is going to change? No one ever stopped to ask. They kept prescribing, they kept telling, they kept instructing and requiring. No one just asked, hey, how are you feeling about this change? It seems overwhelming. It seems big. Let me help. Let me bring that in a little bit. Let me shrink this down a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, they were on board. But what happened was I kept feeling this friction about why does it feel like they have not bought in? Like they agree, you hear them agree, yeah, we're going to do this, yeah, it'll be fine. But it just wasn't that level of enthusiasm that I'm used to seeing with people who interact with this app and RBA. And it was because the elephant was neglected individually, the elephant was neglected for that person. And once we figured that out, we started talking, brought them into the fold. They turned out to be a near zealot of the value of what we're doing. And it didn't change. It didn't suddenly become better. It's that they understood what they were involved in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean,
I just want to bring that back about not all projects are successful. And just because you check the mark next to shape the path and rally the herd doesn't guarantee success. It's awareness of what these elements are telling you in order to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, what you described for me is just listen, it scales up across teams and orgs, but as important, it scales down to the individual. And I think, again, that's why the elephant rider metaphor is so powerful, because it's so, so it's so personal. But it also, like I said, scales up to teams and organizations. So, yeah.
So where does this leave us? So we do this once, we go through this, we feel great, we got 0 to 1 in, we're killing it. Is that when we stop? Is that okay, we're done, everyone can go home? Or like where does going through this type of an effort leave the team and leadership?
Having, I mean, from a leadership perspective, it's absolutely repeatable. I mean, the fundamentals are, I think, foundational, and the approach is fundamental. And like I said, it scales up and scales down. But again, like, it's beginning to end. It's the whole picture. Whether or not you have it all figured out doesn't matter, but you just need to be aware of all of these elements if you want to be durably successful, and then also make some adjustments along the way. Because listen, the path doesn't stay straight. The environment changes, people change, teams, all these things are subject to sort of day-to-day chaos. But your ability to focus and refocus on what's important and make those adjustments is really how you're going to continue to be successful over and over again. And if you, and it's a participation thing, right? Like you can't just come down as a leader and say, hey, we're doing this, and you just have to do what I say, because you're not going to motivate the elephant, right? You're going to lose them.
Just spoke about that.
Yep. So as a leader, being able to execute this as a general framework or universal framework is incredibly scalable across different projects, different initiatives, different life cycles. And for team members to buy in and participate as a team, because that's how all of these things scale, right? That's how you build these habits. That's how you, quote unquote, rally a herd, right? Is you're operationalizing these processes, and bringing as much consistency as you can to be as successful as possible. It's fun. I mean, to be on a team that's high performing and executing and pushing the needle, like, it's fun, and you're contributing to something bigger than yourself. We've seen,
you feel like you're contributing, like your mark, how you help make that effort successful. Like a piece of you is in it.
So it's fun to be a team member in some of these things, and reap the fruits of the labor, so to speak. And there's no shortage of problems to solve and new realities to create, just because the world around us is moving so fast and has become so complex, and everything that we deal with has scale, because that's what technology does. It just scales everything.
The thing that's fun for me, like, I agree with all of those points. The part that I enjoy is watching when a team goes through this process, their demeanor changes around their work, their enthusiasm, their outlook, the way they carry themselves is different. And it's very, like, I don't think on our sales sheet we can ever say make your team happier to work, like, because we can't guarantee it, right? Like, that's not going in a statement of work. But it's absolutely a side effect. It's a second order effect we see. And the way I see it come out with people is two things. One, they can much more clearly articulate the vision they have. It could be as a team, it could be individually, but they seem much clearer at articulating what they want. And number two, they hold a higher expectation that those they interact with buy into that vision, as opposed to following the vendor's vision. Like, they start truly acting like the customer instead of beholden to a vendor's idea of the future. So how many times have we seen leadership push back on vendors and say, no, fix this integration because that's why we need you. We need this integrated because that's a part of our vision. So stop making it break or start making it work. Like, that's what I mean by they actually have an expectation of other people participating, and a confidence that, hey, this is what is needed for us to continue to move forward in our path. So it's almost like they can select vendors and partners faster. They have clear ideas of what next looks like or where the future is. It's like this whole new sense of influence that they have. It's wild to watch.
Well, I mean, you've really brought it full circle. So again, we talked last episode about sort of this mental model we've crafted. Started with, hey, we've got 5 key sources of data. We've got 3 motions or 3
objectives in security.
Objectives. I don't want to call them tasks.
They're main missions, not side missions.
Missions
in the gaming world.
Missions are good. Yeah, missions. Those are the 3 missions, the 3 directives, right? And if that's, and then the piece we talked about today is, all right, how do we create, implement, scale, process to bring those things together? The data, ostensibly the technology, and the missions are the things that the people are working on, right? So those things together, and how do we operationalize that from a success standpoint as a team, as a program? And doing all those things. And we've seen it happen in weeks, right? This isn't years, right? We've seen this happen in weeks. Again, because
this is not a Freudian psychological evaluation that for years you have to show up every week and tell me what your thoughts on avocado toast are.
And it's not extreme.
No,
it's you don't have to do 3 days in the darkness to figure this out or feel this, but so it's
you're already living a lot of this.
Yeah.
In your day-to-day, whether here we talked about this with the Murphy's Laws of Combat, even inaction is a decision. And so you're living this every day. Now it's a matter of seeing it and working with it. That's what this does.
Well,
is you see more of it, and now you start working with it.
We've essentially put the building blocks together for a system across these areas. and then you're not looking at it from a punch list of technologies or products or even working groups or even capabilities, right? We talked about capabilities last time. So you're looking at it from a systems perspective, and you say, all right, I have these things that I'm strong in, right? Like, got awesome endpoint data. We see some pretty distinct behaviors across a couple of behavioral categories, but here's what I'm not seeing, and here's what I think we need to see next. And then you say, first of all, the data is commoditized, because like the data is the data, and what you have is what you have, or what you don't have is what you want to bring in, but it's not specific to
we can start with what you have.
Right. And again, we start with the data. And so if the vendor has some cool little intelligence or even AI kind of stuff that can augment that, great. But like, it's not foundational for what I'm trying to build my system on. So, it's a bonus. It's not a difference maker. So you commoditize almost from a technology standpoint. And then it's not a question of, hey, what does your technology do? It's, hey, does your technology fit into my process? And am I able to build and expand and scale on it? Listen, I'm just going to tell you, probably 90% of the SEs and salespeople out there won't be able to answer that question.
It becomes less, what do you do? And it becomes more, how do you help me? Like, and I don't just mean give me your top sales points about we 100% stop ransomware. No. I don't need that. How do you plug into our vision of find the bad, stop the bad, prevent the bad? How do you help us in this pursuit? And now all of a sudden, that's what I talk about when I say it's almost like they feel like they can influence their own company's security and the strategy in the future. And that's a whole different team now. That team, the habits, the daily, weekly, monthly habits of a team that is oriented around that feeling, night and day different.
Yeah.
Night and day different. Now all of a sudden your engagement goes up. Now all of a sudden you don't have to spend a ton of money on replacing talent every 3 months. Now, like, it has so many other consequences, all because you fixed the problem of their rider, their elephant. Just sync them. Bring them back into this harmony and how they help the program. Once you do that, all these other things they're just not a problem.
Yeah, and you're building that kind of syncing in a sustainable, scaled up, rollable way, I guess. That's a lot of adjectives, but it will
survive talent transitions. When you create a culture in your security group like this, it can easily adapt to new people or to people leaving, right? It becomes very transferable because it's not all in John's head. So if John ever retires, we're screwed. No, that doesn't fit any of this around building habits, around repeatability, training, like growing your people. If it's all in John's head, we don't do any of this.
Yeah. And I think we probably should wrap here, but from a adversarial standpoint, and you think about, hey, we've got our defensive security team and they are a unit. They're a team that leverages all of the technology and has a very robust, if not anti-fragile, process that ties everything together, that scales with
future book review.
Yeah, that scales with internal and external changes. And you're fighting all these thousands of attackers that are just taking pop shots, as many pop shots as they can all the time, right? Spray and pray. I don't know. I feel pretty good about winning that, right? And even if they do get lucky and punch a lottery ticket, we're again, anti-fragile enough to nip that in the bud and make sure it doesn't have a big eye. It doesn't escalate to a big eye incident. So, I mean, that's a fight I want to fight, right? Because I want to win, and that's you can't stack the deck any higher and harder than that, I don't think. So
I know. So we talk about kind of assigning, arranging priorities. I enjoyed that discussion. Go back and listen to it. This one was, so you pick one of those projects, one of those efforts. How do we execute? How do we help the execution of it? In my mind, that's what some of this is. And I love the example of the 0 to 1 deployments because it is a difficult change for almost everyone involved. It asks a lot of the team to adapt to a new way of operating. So I love it as an example of going through these points. And then what happens is by the end, you have a highly adaptable classification for priorities and value and a highly effective delivery model for what's next. Like, that's what you leave when you're done with one of these efforts with us, is now you have the enthusiasm and the critical moves ready for the next one. Okay, let's keep going. It's almost like you awaken something within them that makes them want more. And now you kind of set them loose on their own programs. I mean, there's customers that you and I have gone back to 3 to 4 months later, and they've doubled the work that we were doing with them. Like, they just kept rolling and they did all this additional stuff because they were in it. They knew it, they were in it, and they just kept moving. So, well, I mean, it kind of excites me that we're able to kind of break down something we've seen over and over, but into something that other people can take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a salient example of, hey, you can figure this out for the first time, but then you can also use those learnings to repeat it successfully over and over again. So, all right, with that,
show notes, go into outpost-security.com. You will see the show notes for all the episodes out there. We'll be sure to get a bunch of this out as well.
Yeah, definitely. So with that, thanks for listening. We are excited and highly encourage you to get out and execute.
I feel my rider and elephant nodding in agreement.
No, once again, everyone, thanks for listening. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn and contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.